My grandson called me dead weight during dinner. He said, "We only invited you out of politeness." Everyone laughed. I stayed silent. The next day, he got a call from his college. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Cindy, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. Sometimes the deepest cuts come from the people who are supposed to love you most. It was a Tuesday evening in October when my son David called to invite me to dinner. "Mom, why don't you come over this weekend? Sarah's making her famous pot roast, and Patrick will be home from college." His voice sounded warm, almost eager. I should have known something was off. David rarely called just to chat, and family dinners had become increasingly rare since Patrick started his junior year at Northwestern. I spent all of Saturday afternoon getting ready. I picked out my best blue dress, the one Patrick had complimented 2 Christmases ago, saying it brought out my eyes. I even stopped by the bakery to pick up his favorite chocolate cake. Looking back now, I realize how pathetic I must have seemed. A 72-year-old woman trying so hard to earn love from her own family. The house looked the same as always when I pulled into their driveway. The 2-story colonial I'd helped them buy 15 years ago, when David's construction business was struggling. I'd written the check for the down payment without hesitation. Family helps family, right? That's what I'd always believed. Sarah greeted me at the door with her usual tight smile. "Cindy, you made it." "Not Mom. Never Mom." After 18 years of marriage to my son, I was still just Cindy to her. She took the cake from my hands without a thank you and disappeared into the kitchen. The dining room smelled like pot roast and tension. David sat at the head of the table, already nursing his second beer. Patrick was slouched in his chair, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I entered. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, touching his shoulder gently. He shrugged away from my hand. "Hey, Grandma." That should have been my first warning. Patrick used to call me Grandma Cindy, or just CIN, when he was feeling playful. The formal grandma felt like a wall between us. Dinner started normally enough. Sarah served the pot roast and David asked about my week. I told them about my garden, about the new book club at the community center, small things that seemed to matter less with each passing minute. I noticed Patrick kept checking his phone, and when I asked about his classes he gave one-word answers. "How's your economics major going, honey?" I tried again. "Fine." He didn't even look up. "And your roommate?" "Jake, wasn't it?" "Jason." "And he's fine too." The conversation felt like pulling teeth. I was about to suggest we talk about his plans for Thanksgiving when Patrick's phone buzzed again. This time he actually smiled at whatever message he'd received. "You know, Patrick," Sarah said, her voice taking on that sweet tone that always meant trouble, "your grandmother was just telling us how quiet her life has been lately." Something cold settled in my stomach. "I didn't say that exactly. It must be nice having so much free time," Sarah continued, cutting me off. "No responsibilities, no one depending on you." Patrick finally looked up from his phone, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Something cruel. "Actually, I've been thinking about that," he said, setting his phone down with deliberate care. "About why we keep doing these family dinners." David shifted uncomfortably. "Patrick." "No, Dad, let me finish." Patrick leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on me. "I mean, let's be honest here. We all know the truth." My mouth went dry. "What truth?" Patrick's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "That you're basically dead weight, Grandma. We only invite you to these things out of politeness." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching in my throat. Around the table I waited for someone to defend me, to tell Patrick he was being cruel and unfair. Instead, Sarah let out a small laugh. David looked down at his plate, but his shoulders were shaking with suppressed laughter. Even my own son was laughing at his son's cruelty toward me. "Patrick," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What? It's true, isn't it?" He spread his hands as if he were stating an obvious fact. "You don't work, you don't really contribute anything. Your stories about the book club and your garden are boring as hell. We sit here pretending to care because you're family. But let's not pretend this is anything more than an obligation." The laughter around the table grew louder. Sarah was wiping tears from her eyes. "Oh my God, Patrick, you're terrible," she gasped, but she was still laughing. I sat there in complete silence, my hands folded in my lap, watching my family laugh at my expense. These people I'd loved, supported, sacrificed for were treating me like some kind of joke. The chocolate cake I'd brought sat untouched on the counter, as forgotten as I was. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been paying Patrick's tuition at Northwestern for the past 3 years. $28,000 a year, plus his room and board, plus his spending money. I'd been covering David and Sarah's mortgage payments for the past 18 months when David's business hit another rough patch. I'd paid for Sarah's mother's funeral expenses just 6 months ago when she didn't have the money. I was their safety net, their silent benefactor, and they saw me as dead weight. Somehow I managed to finish dinner. I even helped clear the table, moving through the motions like a robot. When it was time to leave, Patrick didn't even get up from the couch where he'd sprawled to watch television. "Thanks for dinner," I told Sarah, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Of course," she replied, already distracted by something on her phone. "Drive safe." David walked me to my car, and for a moment I thought he might apologize for his son's behavior. Instead, he patted my shoulder awkwardly and said, "Patrick's just stressed about school. You know how kids are." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I drove home through the dark streets, Patrick's words echoed in my mind. "Dead weight. Only invite you out of politeness. Let's not pretend this is anything more than an obligation." By the time I pulled into my own driveway, something had fundamentally shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep, but underneath it was something else. Something harder. I sat in my car for a long time that night, staring at my house, thinking about the phone call I'd received that morning from Northwestern's billing department, confirming Patrick's next tuition payment. $28,000 due in 2 weeks. For the first time in 3 years, I wondered what would happen if that payment didn't come. 3 days after the dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about Patrick's words. They played on repeat in my mind while I watered my plants, while I tried to read, while I lay awake at 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling. Dead weight. The phrase had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I'd always prided myself on being useful to my family. When David's first wife left him and Patrick was just 5 years old, I was there every day, picking him up from school, helping with homework, making sure he felt loved and stable. When David met Sarah and they got married, I stepped back but remained available. When Patrick decided on Northwestern for college, I quietly arranged to cover his expenses so he wouldn't graduate with debt. I thought I was being a good mother and grandmother. Apparently, I was just being a burden they tolerated. On Friday morning, I decided to drop by David's house. Sarah had mentioned during that awful dinner that she was having trouble with her laptop, and I'd offered to take a look. I'd worked as a secretary for 35 years before I retired. I knew my way around computers. Maybe helping with something practical would remind them that I wasn't completely useless. I knocked on the front door, but no one answered. Sarah's car was in the driveway, so I knew she was home. I tried the back door and found it unlocked. "Sarah," I called out as I stepped into the kitchen. "It's Cindy. I came to look at your laptop." I could hear voices coming from upstairs, Sarah's laugh floating down through the ceiling. I climbed the stairs slowly, my arthritis making each step a small effort. The voices were coming from the master bedroom, and as I got closer, I could make out what they were saying. "I swear, David, your mother is going to drive me insane," Sarah was saying. "Did you see how she just sat there during dinner looking all hurt and pathetic?" My hand froze on the banister. "They were talking about me." "Patrick was pretty harsh," David replied, but he was laughing. "Dead weight. Jesus, that kid doesn't pull his punches." "He's not wrong though," Sarah said. "I mean, what does she actually do? She shows up here expecting us to entertain her, tells us boring stories about her book club, and acts like we should be grateful for her presence." I pressed myself against the wall in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "The worst part is how she tries so hard," Sarah continued. "That sad little cake she brought, the way she dressed up like it was some special occasion. It's honestly embarrassing." "She means well," David said, but his tone suggested he was just going through the motions of defending me. "Does she though? Or does she just want attention? Face it, David, your mother is lonely and desperate, and she's making that our problem." There was a pause, and then Sarah's voice dropped to what she probably thought was a whisper. Sometimes I wonder if she's ever going to, die. The words hit me like ice water in my veins. Sarah, David said, but he was still laughing. I'm serious. She's 72, David. How much longer are we going to have to pretend we enjoy these visits? And don't even get me started on holidays. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving. There she is, expecting us to include her in everything. Well, she won't be around forever, David said. And when she's gone, at least Patrick will be set. That house of hers has to be worth at least $400,000, maybe more. Plus whatever she's got saved up. Thank God for that, Sarah replied. Patrick's going to need every penny when he graduates. Do you think she's updated her will recently? My legs felt weak. I gripped the banister harder, trying to process what I was hearing. They were discussing my death like it was an inconvenience they had to wait through. They were planning what to do with my money before I was even gone. Mom's always been good about keeping her affairs in order, David said. Last time we talked about it, everything was going to Patrick. Makes sense, he's the only grandchild. Smart woman, Sarah said. Even if she is a pain in the ass while she's alive. They both laughed again, and I felt something die inside my chest. Not my heart, something deeper than that. Something that had believed, despite everything, that they loved me. I backed down the hallway as quietly as I could, my hands shaking as I gripped the banister. I made it to the kitchen and let myself out the back door, closing it with the softest click I could manage. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The conversation played over and over in my mind. Sometimes I wonder if she's ever going to die. At least Patrick will be set. Even if she is a pain in the ass while she's alive. When I got home, I went straight to my bedroom and opened the safe where I kept my important documents. My will was right there on top, dated 2 years ago. Everything to Patrick, just like David had said. The house, my savings, my retirement accounts, the small investment portfolio I'd built up over the years. All of it going to a young man who thought I was dead weight. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my lawyer, Margaret Chen. We'd gone to high school together 55 years ago, and she'd handled my legal affairs for the past 20 years. Margaret, I said when she answered. It's Cindy Morrison. I need to make some changes to my will. Of course, Cindy. What kind of changes are we talking about? I looked around my bedroom at the photos of Patrick on my dresser, at the crayon drawing he'd made me in 2nd grade that I'd framed and hung on the wall, at all the evidence of a love that, apparently, had never been returned. Major ones, I said. I want to revoke everything and start over. That's quite a big decision, Cindy. Are you sure you want to do this? I thought about Patrick calling me dead weight. I thought about Sarah wondering when I was going to die. I thought about David laughing along with both of them. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. After I hung up with Margaret, I sat on my bed for a long time, staring at that crayon drawing. In it, Patrick and I were holding hands under a rainbow, both of us smiling. He'd written, "I love Grandma Cindy," in his crooked 7-year-old handwriting. I wondered when exactly that love had died, and why I'd been the last one to know. That evening my phone rang. It was Patrick. "Hey, Grandma," he said, his voice cheerful and warm. "I just wanted to call and say thanks for dinner the other night. And sorry if I was kind of rude. I've been stressed about midterms." For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was still something real between us. "That's okay, sweetheart," I said. "How are your classes going?" "Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. I'm having some trouble with my economics class. And I was wondering if you might be able to help me out with a tutor. They're pretty expensive, but I really need to bring my grade up." And there it was. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because he needed money. "How expensive?" I asked. "Maybe $2,000 for the rest of the semester? I know it's a lot, but I'm really worried about my GPA. $2,000. Pocket change compared to what I'd already spent on his education. Money he had no idea I was providing. "Let me think about it," I said. "Really? That would be amazing, Grandma. You're the best." After I hung up, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The warmth in his voice when he asked for money was the most genuine affection I'd heard from him in months. He loved me just enough to lie to me. I picked up the phone and called Margaret back. Margaret, it's Cindy again. I want to move faster on those changes. How soon can we meet? I met with Margaret Chun on Monday morning at her law office downtown. She was one of the few people from my past who still treated me like I mattered, like my thoughts and decisions had weight. As I sat across from her polished desk, I felt more clear-headed than I had in weeks. Before we make any major changes to your will, Cindy, I think we should talk about what's driving this decision, Margaret said, her voice gentle but professional. Last week you seemed quite settled on leaving everything to Patrick. I told her about the dinner, about what I'd overheard at David's house, about Patrick's phone call asking for tutor money. Margaret listened without judgment, occasionally nodding, her expression growing more concerned as I spoke. I'm sorry you're going through this, she said when I finished. Family dynamics can be incredibly painful. But before we proceed, I want to suggest something that might help you make a more informed decision. What kind of suggestion? Margaret leaned forward, her hands clasped on her desk. I have a colleague who specializes in family financial investigations. Sometimes when inheritance disputes arise, it becomes necessary to understand the full financial picture of the beneficiaries. It might be worth understanding exactly what Patrick and David's financial situation looks like. The idea intrigued me. You mean like a private investigator? More like a financial analyst with investigative skills. Someone who can look at public records, credit reports, spending patterns. All legal, all above board. It might help you understand whether your family's behavior toward you is driven by genuine financial need or simple greed. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me felt guilty even considering such a thing. But then I remembered Sarah's voice. Sometimes I wonder if she's ever going to die. How long would something like that take? Maybe 2 weeks for a preliminary report. The question is, are you prepared for what you might find? I looked out Margaret's office window at the busy street below. People hurrying to work, living their lives, most of them probably not wondering if their own families were waiting for them to die. I need to know, I said. I've been making financial decisions based on what I thought I knew about their situations. If I'm going to change my will, I want to make sure I understand why. Margaret nodded and reached for her phone. I'll call James Hendricks. He's discreet, thorough, and fast. 2 days later, I met James at a small coffee shop near my house. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He explained what he'd be looking for. Spending patterns, debt levels, assets, income sources. He'd also check social media posts and public records to get a fuller picture of their lifestyle. Mrs. Morrison, he said, I want to be clear about something. Sometimes these investigations reveal things that families would prefer to keep private. Are you prepared for that possibility? I thought about Patrick's casual cruelty, about Sarah's laughter, about David's silence when he should have defended me. I'm prepared, I said. While I waited for James's report, I found myself paying closer attention to my family's behavior. When Patrick called again 3 days later asking about the tutor money, I told him I was still thinking about it. His disappointment was immediate and sharp. But Grandma, I really need to get this set up soon. The midterm is next week. I understand, sweetheart. Let me just check my budget. There was a pause. Your budget? I mean, I know you're careful with money, but you've got plenty saved up, right? The question caught me off guard. How would he know anything about my savings? What makes you say that? Oh, you always seem pretty comfortable. Nice house, nice car. Dad mentioned you're pretty well set up for retirement. Dad mentioned. So they'd been discussing my finances. I wondered what else David had shared with his son. Well, I'll let you know about the tutor, I said. Okay, but don't wait too long, okay? Time's kind of running out. After I hung up, I realized something that made my skin crawl. Patrick had never asked how I was doing, how I was feeling, whether I needed anything. Every conversation we'd had in the past 6 months had been about something he wanted. James called me exactly 2 weeks after our coffee shop meeting. Mrs. Morrison, I have that report ready. Would you prefer to meet in person, or would you like me to email it to you? In person, I said immediately. Same coffee shop? I'll be there in an hour. When James slid the folder across the table to me, His expression was grim. "Mrs. Morrison, I have to say, this is one of the more troubling financial pictures I've compiled. Your family situation is complex." I opened the folder and began reading. The first page was about Patrick. According to James's research, my grandson was living far beyond any reasonable student budget. His credit card statements, obtained through legal means James didn't fully explain, showed regular charges at expensive restaurants, high-end clothing stores, and online gambling sites. Gambling? I asked, looking up at James. Poker sites, sports betting. He's lost approximately $8,000 in the past 6 months. He's also carrying about $15,000 in credit card debt across 4 different cards. I flipped to the next section about David and Sarah. The news was even worse. David's construction business was failing. Had been failing for over 2 years. They were behind on their mortgage by 4 months, owed back taxes, and had borrowed against their home equity twice. How are they keeping the house? I asked. James pointed to a line item I'd missed. Anonymous payments. Someone's been covering their mortgage for the past 18 months. The payments come from a private account, but I was able to trace the routing numbers. My heart sank. I knew exactly which account those payments were coming from. "There's more," James said quietly. "I found social media posts from Sarah's private Instagram account. She documents a lifestyle that doesn't match their income. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, vacation photos from last month in Hawaii." Hawaii? They told me they couldn't afford to visit me for my birthday because money was tight. James flipped to another page. The Hawaii trip cost approximately $6,000, based on the resort she tagged and the activities she posted about. And Mrs. Morrison, there's something else. Something you should probably know about Patrick's college situation. I braced myself. He's not doing well academically. He's on academic probation and has been for the past semester. His GPA is 2.1. If it doesn't improve significantly, he'll be expelled at the end of this semester. The tutor story was a lie. Even if I gave him the $2,000, it wouldn't be enough to save his college career. He was failing, gambling, spending money like it was water, and lying to me about all of it. "There's one more thing," James said, his voice even quieter now. "I found some text message threads that Patrick posted screenshots of on a private social media account. Messages between him and his parents. He handed me printed copies of the screenshots. My hand shook as I read them. Patrick. How much longer do we have to keep pretending with Grandma? David. Just until she updates the will. Mom's been talking about wanting to make sure you're taken care of. Sarah. The woman is ancient. It can't be much longer. Patrick. I'm getting tired of being nice to her. She's so boring and needy. David. Just a little longer, son. Think of it as an investment in your future. I set the papers down, my vision blurring. James reached across the table and gently touched my hand. Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry. I know this is difficult to see. I took a shaky breath. How long have they been talking like this? Based on the timestamps, at least 8 months. Possibly longer. 8 months. All those family dinners, all those phone calls, all those moments when I thought we were building memories together. They'd been counting down the days until I died. I closed the folder and looked at James. Thank you for being thorough. What will you do now? I thought about the will sitting in Margaret's office, about the tuition payment due next week, about Patrick's casual request for tutor money, about Sarah wondering when I was going to die. I'm going to teach them what it really means to lose something important. As I drove home, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was something much more dangerous than angry. I was determined. I spent the weekend after receiving James's report in a strange state of calm. For the first time in months, maybe years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. But first, I wanted to give my family one last chance to show me who they really were. On Monday morning, I called Margaret and asked her to prepare 2 different wills. The first would leave everything to various charities. The local animal shelter where I'd volunteered for years, the literacy program at the library, the food bank where I helped during holidays. The second would maintain the original plan, leaving everything to Patrick. I want to see how they react when they think the money's gone, I told Margaret. If they show genuine concern for my well-being, if they demonstrate any real love that isn't tied to my bank account, then maybe I'll reconsider. And if they don't? Then I'll know for certain what I've suspected all along. Margaret nodded grimly. When do you want to set this test in motion? This weekend. I'm going to tell them I've been diagnosed with something serious, and that I've updated my will accordingly. I spent the week rehearsing what I would say. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, trying to find the right balance between concern and resignation. I needed them to believe I was sick without being so dramatic that they'd insist on accompanying me to doctor's appointments. On Thursday, Patrick called asking about the tutor money again. Grandma, I really need to know about that $2,000. The tutor wants payment up front. I took a deep breath. Patrick, sweetheart, I need to talk to you and your parents this weekend. Can we all get together? Is everything okay? You sound weird. I just need to discuss some family matters with everyone at once. Can you come home Saturday? I guess so. Is this about the tutor money? Even now, facing what he thought might be bad news about my health, his primary concern was whether he'd get his money. We'll talk about everything on Saturday. Saturday afternoon, I drove to David's house carrying a manila envelope that contained the fake will, leaving everything to charity. My hands were steady on the steering wheel, my mind clear. Whatever happened in the next few hours would determine the rest of my life. Sarah answered the door, her smile tight as always. Cindy, come in. David and Patrick are in the living room. I walked into the familiar space where just weeks ago Patrick had called me dead weight. Now I was about to discover if that assessment was all they saw when they looked at me. Hi, Mom, David said, standing up to hug me. You sounded serious on the phone. Everything okay? Patrick looked up from his phone long enough to nod at me. Hey, Grandma. I sat down in the chair across from them, the envelope in my lap. I asked you all here because I received some troubling news from my doctor this week. Sarah's expression immediately sharpened with interest. David leaned forward. Patrick actually set his phone aside. What kind of news? David asked. I decided to keep the lie simple and believable. I've been having some cognitive issues. Memory problems, confusion. Dr. Patterson ran some tests and the results suggest early-stage dementia. Sarah's eyes widened. Oh my God, Cindy. How early stage? Early enough that I'm still competent to make my own decisions, but Dr. Patterson recommended I get my affairs in order sooner rather than later. I watched their faces carefully. David looked genuinely concerned, which gave me a flicker of hope. Sarah's expression was harder to read. Patrick just looked confused. What does that mean exactly? Patrick asked. Like, how long do you have before? Before I lose my mental capacity? Maybe 2 years, maybe 5. Dr. Patterson couldn't be specific. David reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, I'm so sorry. Is there anything we can do? Any treatment options? For a moment I felt a pang of guilt. David's concern seemed real. But then Sarah spoke. Well, at least you caught it early enough to handle your legal affairs, she said. That's smart planning. Legal affairs. Not I'm sorry you're scared, or we'll help you through this. Legal affairs. Actually, that's the other reason I wanted to talk to you all, I said, lifting the envelope. I've updated my will. The room went completely silent. I could practically hear their hearts beating. I know this might come as a surprise, I continued, but I've decided to leave my estate to charity. The animal shelter, the library, the food bank. Organizations that have been important to me over the years. Patrick's face went white. What? I've been thinking about legacy, about what kind of impact I want to make with the resources I've been blessed with. And I realize that giving to these organizations feels right. But what about Patrick? Sarah asked, her voice sharp with panic. What about his future? I looked at my grandson, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. Patrick is young and capable. He has his whole life ahead of him to build his own success. Grandma, Patrick said, his voice cracking, you can't be serious. I mean, I'm your only grandchild. Doesn't that mean anything? There it was. Not I'm sorry you're sick or we'll miss you when you're gone. Just pure panic about the money. Of course you mean something to me, sweetheart. But I want to use my resources to help as many people as possible. David finally found his voice. Mom, don't you think this is a decision you should make when you're not dealing with a medical crisis? Maybe wait until you've processed this diagnosis. The diagnosis is exactly why I need to handle this now. while I'm still thinking clearly. Sarah stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous, Cindy. You're making an emotional decision based on fear. Patrick is family. These charities are just strangers. Strangers who have never made me feel like a burden, I said quietly. The words hung in the air like a slap. Sarah's face flushed red. Patrick looked confused, but David had the grace to look ashamed. Mom, if this is about what Patrick said at dinner, David started. Dead weight, I said, looking directly at Patrick. That's what you called me. In front of everyone. And instead of defending me, you all laughed. Patrick's face crumpled. Grandma, I was just joking. I didn't mean it. Didn't you? I stood up, still holding the envelope, because it felt very much like you meant it. Suddenly, Patrick was in full damage control mode. He jumped up from the couch and came toward me, his eyes brimming with tears that I suspected were more about the inheritance than any genuine remorse. Grandma, please. I was being stupid. I was stressed about school and I took it out on you. But you have to know how much I love you. Love. The word felt hollow coming from his mouth. How much do you love me, Patrick? I asked. So much. You're the most important person in my life. You've always been there for me. And if I didn't have any money? If I lost everything tomorrow and needed your help instead of the other way around? Would you still feel the same way? He hesitated for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Of course I would. But we both knew he was lying. Sarah tried a different approach. Cindy, I think you're being very unfair. Yes, Patrick made a thoughtless comment, but that doesn't erase years of family love. And frankly, changing your will like this feels vindictive. Vindictive, I repeated. Interesting choice of words. Well, what else would you call it? Sarah's mask was slipping. You're punishing your own family because your feelings got hurt. I looked around the room at these three people who had shaped so much of my life over the past 18 years. David, staring at the floor in shame. Sarah, red-faced with indignation. Patrick, tears streaming down his face in what I now recognized as pure panic over losing his meal ticket. I call it clarity, I said, heading toward the door. For the first time in years, I see exactly where I stand with all of you. Grandma, wait. Patrick called after me. Please, let's talk about this. I'll do anything to make this right. I paused at the doorway and turned back to look at him. Anything. Yes. Anything. Then tell me honestly. If I wasn't leaving you money, would you still want a relationship with me? The question hung in the air. Patrick opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched on until it became its own answer. That's what I thought, I said and walked out. As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in months. The test had worked perfectly. They'd shown me exactly who they were when they thought my money was at stake. Now I knew what I had to do. The calls started that very evening. First David, then Sarah, then Patrick. I let them all go to voicemail. By Sunday morning, I had 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. Patrick's texts were particularly revealing. Grandma, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. You mean everything to me. Please don't do this. I need you. That last one was the most honest thing he'd said in months. He needed me. Not loved me, needed me. Sarah's voicemails were a masterclass in manipulation. The first was apologetic, the second was pleading, and by the third, her true nature was showing through. Cindy, I think you're being incredibly selfish. Patrick is your flesh and blood. How can you choose strangers over your own grandson? This is going to destroy him. David's messages were different. Quieter, more ashamed. Mom, I know we've handled this badly. Can we please just talk? I think there are things we need to clear the air about. I deleted them all without responding. On Monday morning, Margaret called me. Cindy, I've had some interesting visitors this morning. Your son and daughter-in-law are here, asking to speak with me about your will. What did you tell them? That I can't discuss a client's private affairs without their permission. But they're quite insistent. David seems genuinely distressed, but Sarah. Margaret paused. Well, let's just say she's very focused on the legal aspects of your decision. Let me guess. She wants to know if the will can be contested. Among other things. Should I take their visit as evidence that your test revealed what you suspected? I thought about Patrick's panicked tears, about Sarah's immediate concern for legal affairs instead of my health, about how quickly their love had evaporated when they thought the money was gone. It revealed everything I needed to know. That afternoon, Patrick showed up at my house. I watched through my living room window as he sat in his car for several minutes, apparently gathering courage. When he finally knocked on my door, his eyes were red and puffy. "Grandma, please. Can we just talk?" Against my better judgment, I let him in. He followed me to the kitchen, where I poured myself a cup of tea and didn't offer him one. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "about whether I'd want a relationship with you if there wasn't any money involved. And the answer is yes. Absolutely yes. You're my grandmother. You raised me when Dad was working all the time. You taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, took me to baseball games." I sipped my tea and studied his face. He was saying all the right words, but something felt rehearsed about them. "Patrick, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not because you needed something, not because your parents told you to, but because you genuinely wanted to talk to me." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see him thinking, trying to remember. I've been really busy with school." "You've been busy for 2 years. I know I haven't been the best grandson lately, but I want to change that. I want to spend more time with you." "Why now? What's changed?" He looked down at his hands. "You getting sick changed everything. It made me realize how much I'd regret it if something happened to you and I hadn't told you how much you mean to me." It was a good answer. Almost believable. But I'd heard him on the phone with his parents, asking how much longer they had to pretend. "Patrick, I want you to tell me about your classes." "My classes?" "Yes. You mentioned needing a tutor for economics. Tell me about that class. What's the professor like? What topics are you struggling with?" A flicker of panic crossed his face. "Well, we're covering macroeconomic theory and..." He stumbled through a vague description that could have come from any economics textbook. I knew from James's report that Patrick was failing most of his classes, that the tutor story was a lie, that he was on academic probation. "And your roommate Jason? How's he doing?" "Jason's good. He's also struggling with some of his classes." Another lie. There was no Jason. According to Northwestern's records, Patrick had requested a single room this year because he couldn't get along with roommates. I set my teacup down and looked at my grandson, this young man I'd loved since the day he was born, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Everything about him was false, from his tears to his apologies to his promises to do better. "Patrick, I want you to leave now." "What?" "But Grandma, we were just talking. We were just lying. You've been lying to me for months, maybe years. About school, about money, about your feelings for me. And I'm tired of it. I don't know what you think I'm lying about. You're on academic probation. You're failing your classes. You don't have a roommate named Jason. You've been gambling online and you're in debt. And you've been calling me dead weight behind my back, while asking me for money to cover your mistakes." His face went white. "How do you?" "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that now I know who you really are." Patrick's carefully constructed facade crumbled. "Okay, yes, I've made some mistakes. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. Doesn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you love my wallet and tolerate me." He started crying again, but this time it felt different. Less controlled, more desperate. "Grandma, please. I know I've screwed up, but if you cut me off, I'll lose everything. I'll get kicked out of school. I'll have to move back home. My whole future will be ruined." "And whose fault is that?" "Mine. It's my fault. But please don't let one mistake destroy my whole life." "One mistake?" As if lying to me for years, calling me dead weight, and treating me like an ATM were just one small error in judgment. "Patrick, your whole life isn't my responsibility. It's yours. But you're family. Family helps family. Family also respects family. Family doesn't call each other dead weight. Family doesn't count down the days until someone dies, so they can inherit their money." He stared at me and I could see him trying to figure out how much I knew, how much evidence I had of his real feelings. "I'm going to ask you to leave now," I said, standing up. "And I don't want you to come back." "Grandma, wait. No. I've heard enough lies for one lifetime. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, feeling strangely empty. Not sad exactly. More like relieved. I'd spent so many years making excuses for Patrick's behavior, telling myself he was just young, just stressed, just going through a phase. Now I could finally stop pretending. That evening David called. This time I answered. Mom, Patrick told me about your conversation today. I think there might be some misunderstanding. David, let me ask you something. Did you know Patrick was failing school? Silence. Did you know he's been gambling online? More silence. Did you know he's been lying to me about needing tutor money? Mom, You did know. You all knew, and you let me keep sending him money anyway. We thought it was better if it came from you. We didn't want you to worry. You didn't want me to worry, or you didn't want me to stop paying? Another long pause. Mom, we're family. We're supposed to support each other. I've been supporting all of you for years, David. When do I get some support back? You know we love you. Do I? Because honestly, David, I'm not sure I do know that anymore. I hung up before he could respond. Outside my kitchen window, the sun was setting over the garden I'd planted 40 years ago when I'd first bought this house. The garden where I'd taught Patrick to plant tomatoes when he was 7, where we'd pick strawberries together every summer until he decided he was too old for such childish activities. Tomorrow I would call Margaret and make the charity will official. Tonight, I would sit in my garden and remember what it felt like to love someone who loved me back, even if it had only been an illusion. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment overlooking the lake, reading a book and enjoying the kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The apartment was smaller than my house, but it was mine in a way that felt completely different. No one knew where I lived except Margaret and my new doctor. No one called asking for money or expecting me to solve their problems. I'd sold the house 3 months after our final confrontation. The same house where Patrick had learned to walk, where David had brought Sarah to meet me for the first time, where I'd hosted countless family dinners and holiday celebrations. I sold it to a young couple with twin daughters who promised to take care of the garden. The money from the sale, combined with my savings and retirement accounts, had gone into a trust managed by Margaret. The trust would support me comfortably for the rest of my life, and whatever remained would go to the charities I'd chosen. The animal shelter where I now volunteered 3 days a week. The literacy program where I helped adults learn to read. The food bank where I'd found a community of people who appreciated genuine kindness. I hadn't spoken to David, Sarah, or Patrick since that day in my kitchen. I knew from Margaret that they'd initially tried to contest my mental competency, but the medical records showing I'd never actually been diagnosed with dementia had ended that quickly. I knew Patrick had been expelled from Northwestern and was living at home, working at a fast food restaurant. I knew David's business had finally collapsed and they'd lost the house I'd been secretly helping them keep. I should have felt guilty about their struggles. Part of me expected to feel guilty. But every time I thought about reaching out, I remembered Patrick's voice calling me dead weight. Remembered Sarah wondering when I was going to die. Remembered David's silence when he should have defended me. Some lessons come too late to matter. On a Tuesday morning in November, Margaret called with news I'd been expecting. Cindy, I received a call from David this morning. He's asking if you'd be willing to meet with him. What did you tell him? That I'd pass along the message. But Cindy, there's something else you should know. Patrick is in the hospital. My chest tightened involuntarily. What happened? Car accident. He's stable, but he's been asking for you. I closed my eyes, feeling that familiar tug of old obligations, old loves, old patterns of rescuing and forgiving and pretending that this time would be different. Margaret, can you do me a favor? Of course. Can you send flowers to the hospital? Something nice but not too personal. And include a card that says, wishing you a full recovery. That's all. That's all. After I hung up, I sat by my window and watched the lake. I thought about the Patrick I'd raised, the little boy who used to climb into my lap and ask me to read him stories. I thought about the young man who'd called me dead weight and lied to my face about needing tutor money. I thought about how long I'd confused loving someone with enabling them. 2 weeks later, Margaret called again. David came to see me yesterday. He's asking if you'd consider helping Patrick with medical bills. And what did you tell him? That you'd made your position clear. But Cindy, he seemed genuinely desperate. He said Patrick's been asking about you every day since the accident. Has Patrick asked to apologize or has he asked for money? Margaret was quiet for a moment. David didn't specify. That tells me everything I need to know. A month before my 73rd birthday, I was volunteering at the animal shelter when a young woman approached me. She was maybe 25 with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Excuse me, are you Cindy Morrison?" I nodded cautiously. "My name is Amy Chen. Margaret Chen is my aunt. She told me about the literacy program you help with, and I was wondering if you might have time to work with my grandmother. She's from Taiwan, and she's been wanting to improve her English reading." We talked for 20 minutes about her grandmother, about the program, about how much it meant to have patient teachers who understood that learning was never too late. As I drove home, I realized something that surprised me. I hadn't thought about Patrick, David, or Sarah once during our conversation. I was building a new life with new people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. It felt strange and wonderful and exactly right. On my birthday, I received 3 cards. One from Margaret and her family, thanking me for the scholarship fund I'd established for students from low-income families. One from the director of the animal shelter, telling me about the new kennel they'd been able to build with my donation. One from Mrs. Yang, Amy's grandmother, written in careful English thanking me for helping her read her first complete book in her new language. No card from David. No call from Patrick. No flowers from Sarah. For the first time in years, that didn't hurt. I spent my birthday at the lake, reading a novel and eating chocolate cake I'd bought for myself. As the sun set, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, desperately trying to buy love from people who saw me as dead weight. I thought about the woman I was now, surrounded by genuine affection from people who appreciated my time, my skills, my heart. I thought about Patrick, probably still recovering, maybe still asking his father when Grandma was going to help with the bills. I hoped someday he'd understand that the greatest gift I'd ever given him wasn't money. It was showing him that actions have consequences, that love can't be purchased, and that respect has to be earned. But that was his lesson, to learn or not learn. My lesson was simpler. I was worth more than my bank account, and I deserved better than crumbs of conditional affection. 3 years later, I would receive a letter from Patrick. A real apology, written from a place of genuine understanding, rather than financial desperation. He'd be married by then, working as a mechanic, living a modest life that he'd built with his own hands. In the letter, he'd thanked me for loving him enough to let him fail, for caring about him enough to stop enabling his worst choices. But that was still years away. On this birthday, my 73rd, I was simply a woman who'd learned to love herself enough to walk away from people who didn't deserve her. The chocolate cake was delicious. The sunset was beautiful. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely, genuinely free. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. And sometimes the only way to save someone is to stop trying to save them. I'd learned that lesson just in time to save myself.